The death of Muammar Gaddafi was both end and beginning.
Against the regime in Benghazi. And that unrest soon then spread to other towns in the east.
All bets were off. We saw Libyans forming their own armed groups, what were known at the time as revolutionary brigades.
It was this grainy amateur footage 6 months ago that signaled to the world that Libya was on the verge of a popular revolt.
The drainage pipe was cold, dark, and reeked of stagnant water. Inside, crouched like a cornered animal, was the man who had ruled Libya for 42 years. Blood matted his hair. His breathing was shallow. Outside, he could hear the voices getting closer. This was how it would end for Muammar Gaddafi. Not in a palace, but in a concrete tube beneath a dusty road. But to understand how the hunter became the hunted, we must go back to where it all began. Muammar Mohammed Abu Minyar al-Gaddafi was born in 1942 in a desert camp near the town of Sirte, Libya. The boy from the Bedouin tent would one day terrorize and transform a nation. As a young man, he joined the military and studied in Libya and later in the United Kingdom. In 1969, at just 27 years old, he led a bloodless coup against King Idris and took control of the country. From that moment, Gaddafi ruled Libya with an iron fist. He dismantled the monarchy, closed US and British military bases, and nationalized the oil industry. He created his own political system, called the Jamahiriya, which he claimed gave power to the people. But in reality, he kept absolute control. Every decision, every policy, every execution, all bore his signature. During the 1970s and 1980s, Gaddafi became the West's nightmare. He supported armed groups across the globe and was blamed for terror attacks, including the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, which killed 270 innocent people. The boy from the desert had become the world's most feared terrorist sponsor. Libya faced crushing international sanctions for years, but Gaddafi was also a master of reinvention. He tried to present himself as a Pan-African and Pan-Arab leader, pushing for unity among African countries while positioning himself as a voice against Western imperialism. By the 2000s, sensing the changing winds, he began softening his image, giving up weapons programs, reopening ties with Western nations, and attempting to rebuild Libya's economy. Yet beneath the surface, Libya was a powder keg. His people lived under suffocating control. Political parties were banned. Freedom of speech was a death sentence. Corruption flowed like oil through every institution. While Gaddafi and his family lived in golden palaces, ordinary Libyans struggled to survive. The wealth from oil filled the pockets of the elite, while the masses watched from the sidelines. So when protests erupted in February 2011, it wasn't surprising that millions joined in. In Benghazi, Libya's second-largest city, the uprising came on the heels of successful revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt. This wave of resistance across the region became known as the Arab Spring. In Libya, it began on February 15th, when families of political prisoners gathered outside a police station. Turbel had been arrested for speaking out about the 1996 Abu Salim prison massacre, a dark chapter where over 1,200 inmates were systematically executed by Gaddafi's security forces. Among the dead was Fatima al-Rashid's brother, a political prisoner whose only crime was dreaming of democracy. These families had waited 15 years for justice. The protest quickly gained momentum. By February 17th, the day of rage, thousands of Libyans filled the streets in Benghazi, Baida, Tobruk, and Derna. They were angry about decades of dictatorship, poverty, and oppression. Instead of allowing peaceful demonstrations, Gaddafi's security forces opened fire. Over 230 people were killed within 4 days. Many were shot in the chest and head, execution-style killings of unarmed civilians. Rather than calm the situation, Gaddafi's government sent in more troops and positioned snipers on rooftops. State media claimed the uprising was caused by foreign agents and drugged youths. Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam, appeared on television with a chilling warning. Rivers of blood will flow if the protests don't stop. The threat was not empty rhetoric. It was a promise. But the crackdown backfired spectacularly. Key military units began defecting. In Benghazi, entire army divisions refused to fire on their own people. The 36th Brigade, led by Major General Suleiman Mahmoud, turned their weapons against the regime and helped rebels seize control of the city. Government buildings burned. Police stations were overrun. The revolution had found its teeth. By February 24th, most of eastern Libya had slipped from Gaddafi's grasp. Cities like Tobruk, Misrata, Baida, and Zawiya erupted in fierce battles. Protesters armed themselves with rifles looted from army bases. Some of Gaddafi's own Air Force pilots refused orders to bomb cities, instead flying their planes to Malta to seek asylum. The hunter was losing his hunting ground. The opposition quickly organized into the National Transitional Council, officially formed on February 27th in Benghazi. Led by former Justice Minister Mustafa Abdul Jalil, the NTC claimed to represent the revolutionary forces and began planning a Libya without Gaddafi. For the first time in decades, Libyans dared to imagine freedom. But Gaddafi wasn't finished. He held on to Tripoli and the western regions, with elite units like the Khamis Brigade, led by his son Khamis, equipped with tanks and artillery. The regime hired foreign mercenaries from Chad, Mali, and Niger, fighters with no emotional connection to Libya, willing to kill for money. By early March 2011, the situation reached a breaking point. Gaddafi's forces unleashed heavy weapons, tanks, and air power to retake rebel-held cities. Civilians were bombed mercilessly, especially in eastern areas like Benghazi and Ajdabiya. International news showed graphic images of neighborhoods reduced to rubble. The fear was palpable. Gaddafi would massacre anyone who opposed him. On March 12th, the Arab League called for a no-fly zone over Libya, crucial regional support for intervention. France and the United Kingdom pushed hard at the United Nations. On March 17, 2011, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 1973, authorizing all necessary measures to protect civilians. The international community had decided. Gaddafi had gone too far. Just 2 days later, on March 19th, the airstrikes began. The coalition, United States, France, United Kingdom, Canada, and Italy, launched over 110 Tomahawk cruise missiles from warships in the Mediterranean. French fighter jets destroyed tanks advancing toward Benghazi. Gaddafi's military infrastructure crumbled under the assault. The hunter was now being hunted from the sky. On March 23rd, NATO assumed full command under Operation Unified Protector, including 28 NATO members and partners like Qatar, the UAE, and Jordan. The air campaign systematically destroyed Gaddafi's MiG-23 fighter jets, Sukhoi bombers, and military bases. NATO also targeted supply convoys and command centers. At sea, warships enforced an arms embargo, choking off Gaddafi's lifeline. Despite the devastating losses, Gaddafi remained defiant, appearing on state television to accuse NATO of trying to colonize Libya. He called the rebels rats and traitors, promising to cleanse the country street by street. His regime fired Russian-made surface-to-air missiles at NATO planes, but every shot missed its target. The once feared dictator was reduced to empty threats and failing weapons. By mid-2011, the battlefield had shifted decisively in favor of the rebels. NATO's relentless targeting of supply routes, weapons depots, and command centers stretched Gaddafi's forces thin. Rebel groups from the western mountains, the Misrata Front, and eastern Libya began converging on the capital like a tightening noose. On August 20th, 2011, the rebels launched Operation Mermaid Dawn, their final assault on Tripoli. It was a masterfully coordinated plan, involving fighters secretly smuggled into the city earlier. As armed convoys advanced from outside, Sleeper cells rose up from within. The capital became a war zone.
Over 5 days, heavy fighting erupted across Tripoli. Neighborhoods like Tajura, Fashloom, and Souk al-Jumah became battlegrounds. Loyalist forces tried desperately to hold their positions using snipers and tanks, but they were overwhelmed by the speed and fury of the rebel advance. Many Gaddafi soldiers simply abandoned their posts and disappeared into the chaos. On August 23rd, rebels overran Bab al-Azizia, Gaddafi's heavily fortified compound in central Tripoli. This fortress had been the heart of his rule for over 4 decades, protected by concrete walls, bunkers, and underground tunnels. Inside, rebels found luxury items, weapons, and documents, evidence that Gaddafi had fled in panic. But the man himself was gone. Intelligence reports confirmed that Gaddafi had left Tripoli before the final assault, likely around August 19th or 20th. He moved between safe houses with loyal tribal networks, always one step ahead of capture. His family scattered like leaves in the wind. His wife, Safia Farkash, daughter Aisha, and sons, Hannibal and Mohammed, fled to Algeria. Another son, Saadi, escaped to Niger. But Gaddafi himself made a fateful choice. He refused to leave Libya. Abandoning the country would mean total defeat, and his pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, he decided to hide in areas controlled by loyalist tribes, especially around Sirte, his hometown. Walking through the empty streets where he was born, Gaddafi stopped at his childhood home. The windows were boarded up now. Located 450 kilometers from Tripoli along the Mediterranean coast, Sirte held deep personal meaning for Gaddafi. It wasn't just his birthplace. It was a city he had built up during his reign, with modern buildings, wide roads, and government offices. He had hosted African Union summits there, and once dreamed of making it the capital of a United States of Africa. Now, it would be his tomb. Gaddafi reached Sirte in early September 2011 with a shrinking inner circle. Close aides, bodyguards, and fighters from his own Qadadfa tribe. 2 of his sons were believed to be with him: Mutassim, a military commander, and Saif al-Islam, his political heir. Abu Bakr Yunus Jaber, Libya's longtime defense minister, had served Gaddafi for 30 years. Now, watching his leader's empire crumble, he wondered if loyalty had been worth it. By mid-September, NTC forces surrounded Sirte like vultures circling carrion. Thousands of fighters from Misrata, Benghazi, and Zintan approached from multiple directions. Their goal was simple: capture Gaddafi and end this war. The rebels expected a quick victory, but Sirte would prove to be a deadly trap. Loyalist fighters had transformed the city into a fortress. Snipers nested in civilian buildings. Artillery units used homes, schools, and hospitals as shields. Streets were booby-trapped with landmines and improvised explosive devices. Starting in mid-September, the NTC began heavy bombardment. Grad rockets, mortars, and tank fire pounded buildings daily, while NATO aircraft bombed key targets. Inside Sirte, Gaddafi and his group lived like rats in a maze, moving between abandoned homes and underground bunkers to avoid detection. The smell of burning concrete, mixed with gunpowder, hung over the city like a toxic cloud. He no longer had a clear command structure, but Gaddafi still gave orders to keep fighting. His son, Mutassim, coordinated the city's defenses in what everyone knew was a hopeless last stand. By late September, Sirte was completely surrounded. The NTC controlled the outskirts and began a brutal, block-by-block advance. Sniper fire and street battles made progress slow and bloody. Hundreds of fighters died on both sides. The constant buzz of NATO drones had become the city's soundtrack, a mechanical death song that never stopped. NATO surveillance tracked every electronic signal, so Gaddafi ordered his group to avoid phones, radios, or any electronic equipment. Their few satellite phones were rarely used, and they relied on human messengers who moved through the city on foot. Electricity and water were cut off. The group survived on canned goods and dry rations,
scrounging what they could from damaged stores. By October, around 200 fighters still remained loyal to Gaddafi, mostly men from his own tribe who had known him since childhood. These were his last guardians, forming a protective convoy whenever they moved. Gaddafi's health had visibly declined. He had lost weight, looked pale and exhausted, and was no longer the confident figure once seen on television. His son Mutassim found him one morning, staring at old photographs of the family during better times.
After Tripoli's fall, Gaddafi stopped broadcasting public messages. Unlike earlier in the war, when he appeared regularly on state TV, he now avoided cameras completely. Any leak of his location would result in a NATO airstrike. His silence was strategic. He wanted the world to believe he might already be dead, or somewhere else entirely. Still, he had one final gambit. His goal was to break through the siege and flee south to Sabha in the central desert, or possibly across the border into Niger, where other government officials had escaped. "We leave tonight," he told his inner circle one evening. "If we stay, we die here, like rats in a trap." But every exit route was blocked. Roads were watched, convoys were attacked or turned back. With no way out and nowhere to hide, Gaddafi's group became increasingly desperate. They slept in shifts, some standing guard while others rested. Sandbags and debris shielded building entrances from drone surveillance. The white Toyota pickup truck that would carry him to his death was already parked outside, waiting. In a control room thousands of miles away, a drone operator had just spotted an unusual heat signature moving through Sirte. By October 19th, Gaddafi could no longer hold out in Sirte. That night, he made the decision to attempt one last escape. The plan was desperate, but simple. Form a convoy of over 50 vehicles and break out under cover of darkness. Most were pickup trucks and SUVs, fitted with mounted machine guns and anti-aircraft weapons. The convoy carried Mutassim, Mansour Dao, Gaddafi's security chief, several military officers, and family members. Around 8 p.m. on October 19th, the convoy began moving from a hidden location in the city. Vehicles traveled without headlights, weaving between buildings and under trees, hoping darkness would shield them from the eyes in the sky. Their destination? The outskirts of Sirte, then southwest toward Wadi Zamzam, and finally to Sabha, where they would attempt to cross into Niger or Algeria. Unknown to them, NATO surveillance drones had been monitoring Sirte continuously for weeks. American and French intelligence analyzed every movement, waiting for exactly this moment. That same night, a US MQ-1 Predator drone flying silently above Sirte detected heat signatures showing a large convoy forming and moving out of the city. In the early morning hours of October 20th, as the convoy reached Sirte's western outskirts, NATO made its move. Around 8:30 a.m., a US Predator drone launched a Hellfire missile at the lead vehicles. The strike immediately halted the convoy's advance. Minutes later, French Mirage fighter jets dropped laser-guided bombs on the rear vehicles. Multiple trucks exploded in flames, trapping those in the middle and sending the survivors into panic. Gaddafi's guards tried to fight back, but they were outgunned and exposed. Vehicles flipped and crashed as drivers attempted to escape. Dozens of loyalist fighters died instantly. The survivors abandoned their burning trucks and ran toward nearby buildings, open lots, and a large concrete drainage pipe beneath the road. Gaddafi, Mutassim, Mansour Dao, and a few others survived the airstrikes and fled on foot. Covered in dust and blood, they slipped into the large drainage pipe. It was about 4 feet in diameter, just big enough for a man to crawl through. Inside the cramped, humid tunnel, with water dripping somewhere in the darkness, they waited in silence, hoping to avoid discovery. Rebel fighters from Misrata had been tracking the convoy's path and arrived shortly after the airstrike. Armed with rifles, grenades, and light machine guns, they began searching methodically. It didn't take long to notice bloodstains and footprints leading toward the road. A few followed the trail and spotted the drain entrance. They threw a grenade into the pipe first, expecting more guards inside. Then they moved closer to investigate. That's when they saw him. Muammar Gaddafi, crouched in the darkness like a wounded animal. He wore brown pants, a blood-stained shirt, and a flak vest. His hair was matted with blood and dirt. He had injuries to his left arm, back, and right leg from the airstrike's blast and debris. They dragged him into the blinding sunlight. He stumbled, barely able to walk. Mutassim, also wounded but still standing, was captured moments later, along with Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr, who was seriously injured. Mansour Dow was among those taken alive, and later confirmed they had been trying to escape to Saba when the missiles struck. The rebels placed Gaddafi in the back of a pickup truck. News of his capture spread rapidly over radios and phones, and fighters rushed to the scene from all directions. As the truck moved slowly through the narrow roads, people began attacking him with sticks, fists, and gun butts. They pulled his hair, tore his clothes, and shouted insults, referencing years of dictatorship, torture, and suffering under his rule. Multiple videos, later shared worldwide, showed Gaddafi bleeding heavily from the head and abdomen. At some point, he tried to sit up, but was forced back down. The violence continued for several minutes as the truck struggled through crowds of armed fighters. The exact moment of his death remains unclear. According to medical reports, he had been shot in the head and abdomen. A witness claimed his last coherent words were, "What did I do to you?" By the time the truck reached an NTC checkpoint, Muammar Gaddafi was dead. Multiple gunshot wounds, bruises across his body, his clothes soaked in blood. He died around 1 p.m. on October 20th, 2011, at age 69. His body was taken to Misrata, a city that had suffered tremendously during the war. For 3 days, it was kept in a refrigerated meat locker while hundreds lined up to see it. Many took photos and videos. A moment of closure for some, revenge for others. Mutassim and Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr had also died shortly after capture. On October 23rd, the NTC officially declared the end of the civil war. After over 8 months of conflict and more than 30,000 deaths, Libya was finally free from Gaddafi's grip. On October 25th, he was buried in a remote desert location in western Libya. To this day, the precise burial site remains unknown. Gaddafi's end was violent, but it reflected the brutality he had shown his own people for decades. Many questions remained unanswered. Who fired the final shot? Why wasn't he tried in court? Could his capture have ended differently? But for most Libyans, it didn't matter. The desert sand has already covered the tire tracks from that October morning. In Libya today, children who never lived under Gaddafi's rule play in the ruins of buildings destroyed in the civil war. They don't know that somewhere beneath their feet, in an unmarked grave, lies the man who once promised to hunt down his enemies, house to house, room to room. The hunter had become the hunted. The dictator had become the victim. And in the end, the boy from the desert camp returned to the desert, not as a conqueror, but as dust.